Hi, folks. It's strange on this not being able to see all the little squares with your names as we have the screen share on to introduce this session. First, let me introduce what we're doing today and who will be involved. As you likely know, I'm Charles Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario. And today we're actually happy to host the Ontario Arts Council talking about the Art Response Initiative, which they have just announced a few weeks back about some funds, emergency funds that are available to artists through the Ontario Arts Council. So basically, I will moderate today, and the Arts Council staff, Maura Broadhurst and Bushra Junaid, will make some comments about the initiatives and other OAC things that are rolling out. And there's opportunities for you to ask some questions, either in the chat box, or there may be time to ask questions as we're going through the next hour. If you put your comments in the chat box, those will be forwarded to the OAC, so they might be able to respond to you, either as a general response or a particular one, depending upon the nature of the question. And obviously you can follow up with the staff, the OAC staff who are here. While times I'm sure are pretty crazy for them, I found them to be rather accessible in the past. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to pass it on to Maura Broadhurst and to Bushra Junaid to lead the conversation. In this time, I find it particularly important to acknowledge the land that we are on, not so much as just mentioning names of the indigenous nations that have used this territory, have worked with this territory, have cared for this territory for time immemorial, and the particular nations, the Mississauga, the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, who have termed this, particularly the agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, which have declared Toronto as the area, the dish with one spoon, as an environment in which whoever comes has three responsibilities to the land. One is to be able to share the resources. Two is to be able to take care of the resources, to not deny anybody who's in need, and to take care of the resources so that 7 generations down the road have access to the same, similar resources that are currently in place. We start with that, it's PAMO, because we feel it's important that in the arts, we begin to move toward a transformative model of sharing, of looking at each other and saying, how can we advance the arts ecology through a practice of looking at needs and providing services to those needs, making sure that no one is going without. And so we, of course, were very interested in working with the OAC in sponsoring this session as a way of sharing information that may be useful to artists across the community, particularly artists who are indigenous or people of color, whether Black, South Asian, Asian, and other marginalized groups, queer, persons with disabilities and deaf, and so on, and community engaged artists as well. So I'm going to turn it over from here to Maura and Bushra. I would ask that during this session that you please mute your microphones and please have your camera off until you speak, if that does happen. And again, to remind you, any comments or questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat room. If we can get to them today, we will. If we can't, that information goes over to the OAC, and we anticipate they will be able to respond. So over to you, Maura and Bushra.
Great, thanks so much, Charles, and thank you to the whole team at SAPAMO for giving us this opportunity to connect directly with people. There's lots of you on the call today, which is wonderful. It's we're really happy to be able to share an hour with you, share some information, at least start the conversation that, as Charles says, if we need to follow up afterwards, we can certainly do that as well. I'll just go to the first slide of the presentation. I want to also thank you for your land acknowledgement, and just add that the Ontario Arts Arts Council does acknowledge that Indigenous peoples are the original occupants of the land. It supports the significant contributions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit artists in all regions of our province through a number of programs and initiatives at the OAC. It supports the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, its calls for action, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the OAC is committed to fostering the strength and diversity of Indigenous art forms, practices, and cultural expressions. The next slide just sort of outlines a quick agenda that will follow today, just very briefly. So yes, I am Maura Broadhurst. I'm the Arts Sector Development Officer at the Ontario Arts Council. I've been at the OAC for about I think it's coming up to 9 years now, and I've had a couple of different roles there. The main portfolio that I manage are the Art Service Organizations, which is the program through which SPAMO gets its funding, for example. But I'm also working in some of the market development programs now as well. And I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues. Elizabeth Brodakis is the program administrator for the Art Service Organizations program, but also for this Arts Response Initiative. So there's Elizabeth, and she's helping me out with the presentation today. And also Bushra Junaid is with us as well, and Bushra will be speaking a little bit later in the presentation about the Skills and Career Development Program, as well as anything else you want to speak to Bushra about. So just very quickly, a review of the Ontario Arts Council in general. So next slide. The OAC is the arts funding agency of the province of Ontario. We are funded directly through the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industries. Our entire budget comes directly from the ministry, and we administer the arts grants to artists, arts collectives, and arts organizations in the province. You can see here that the mandate is to foster the creation and production of art for the benefit of all Ontarians. So we're here for the artists and the arts communities, but also to ensure that the public in Ontario has access to professional arts in their community. Most of you probably, if you have a relationship with the OAC, probably have come to the OAC through your discipline. So you're a writer, you come to our literature grants probably, or a dancer, you look through our dance programs. But we have sort of defined all the programs. We have many, many programs at the OAC, and they are defined through these 4 granting streams. So creating and presenting, building audiences and markets, engaging communities and schools, and developing careers and art services. So all of the programs in those streams are still active. If they needed to be amended a little bit, opened up a little bit because of different kind of activity as a result of COVID, that's happened. But if you are able to still create and present your work, for example, you should still go through the programs in that stream. Or if you are out working in the community and doing your work, then going to our Engaging Communities and Schools programs, or like the Skills and Careers Development Program that Bushra will be speaking about, you'll go through the Developing Careers and Art Services. The one stream that has been affected by COVID-19 is some of the programs in our Building Audiences and Markets. So our market development programs, our touring programs, and also some of the Chalmers Family Fund that goes to support our Chalmers Fellowship Program. Those programs are currently suspended because they are highly reliant on travel, and because of travel restrictions and the sort of unknowns around that whole aspect of life right now. We've suspended those programs for 2020, and in fact, it is the budgets for those programs that we've been able to redirect to create this Arts Response Initiative. So this new program is just a one-time response a little bit to what's happening. The deadlines are in 2020 only, and hopefully next year those funds go back to those respective programs as we hope to see those kind of activities continue in the future. All of this information is on our website, so if you do, have something that you think you want a program you're interested in, obviously you can find information on the website about those. Next slide. I did also want to remind everybody that in the current strategic plan that the OAC is working under, there are 6 priority groups identified. So Indigenous artists, artists of color, Francophone artists, deaf artists and artists with disabilities, new generation artists, and artists living outside of Toronto. These groups of artists have all been identified because historically, and indeed continuing to this day, artists from these communities have faced barriers to accessing and receiving public funds for their art activity. So at the OAC, most of these groups have we have distinct programs that serve these artists and arts organizations from these communities. Which is not to say that those are the only programs artists from these communities can apply to. They're open to apply to any programs that they're eligible in at the OAC, but there's specific programs to serve these communities. And in addition to that, those programs are juried by members from these communities as well, which is a distinction that we make. In all of our programs, we make sure that when preparing our jurors to do their work, to do their assessment of applications, that they are made to be familiar with these priority groups. We ask them to think about the context that applicants from these communities are working in, and to take that into consideration when they're reading applications, when they're discussing them, and when they make their final decisions about who receives a grant. Next slide. So onto the Arts Response Initiative. Obviously, when things happened in the spring, we heard from people from the community immediately and quite a bit, and we reached out to others to just hear about what was happening, what kind of impacts the pandemic was having on artists and arts groups around the province. And of course, we all know that there was sort of that initial phase when everything was in crisis mode and we were trying to all adjust, but it continues on today. That it has certainly not ended, and unfortunately, the negative impact is not going to be over for a while. So this response initiative, we decided that based on the conversations that we've had, based on what we could see happening in the community, we wanted to ensure that the different applicants that we serve at the OAC had access to the funds, and we created these 3 streams. So there's a stream for individual artists to apply to. There's one for ad hoc groups, collectives, and organizations to apply to help themselves. And then there is one that we're calling organizational partnerships. This is well, I'll get into it a little bit later. I'll go through each of them. The idea is not to replace our existing programs to help with you create your work or present your work. That still exists in our regular programs. But if you can't create your work right now, or you can't present in the way that you normally do, and you need help to overcome whatever barriers that are existing because of COVID, in order to be able to continue your normal artistic practice, or perhaps you've had to change your artistic practice a little bit, or how you engage with your audience a little bit. So anything that you need to do in order to be able to do your activity is what this program is for. So you must tell in your application, you'll be asked to talk about what are the challenges that you're facing because of the pandemic that is stopping you, or so maybe preventing you entirely, or maybe just causing you problems in doing your work, and then you'll be asked what are you proposing to help you overcome it? What would you use the funds for to help you get to a place where you can once again be creating and presenting and sharing your work? This can be activity that will help you in the very short term. Just for right now, you need this thing to help you get over this hump, or it could be something that might play out over quite a while, or even long term. We know that in some cases, you don't really know what's going to work. You have to do something differently, but you're not too sure what that looks like. So it can be experimental a little bit. There is the possibility that you'll try it out and it won't be quite right, and you'll have to try again. That's okay. It may be about, literally about just how to make sure that you have a space to work in, or a place to engage with your audience. It could also be new ways of reaching presenters, new ways of developing markets. All of that kind of thing are things that we are thinking about with this fund and are open to you to propose. And it could also address any public health and safety concerns that you have to look at in order to continue your practice. So the first program for individuals. So to be an individual applicant at the Ontario Arts Council, you must be a professional artist. And what we are saying is that if you're eligible in one of our other discipline project programs, then you're eligible for this program. So if you've applied to the OAC before and your application wasn't withdrawn because you weren't ineligible, because you were ineligible or something, as long as you applied, you don't have to have received the grant. But if you've applied, then you know you're eligible and you can apply to this program. If you've never applied to the OAC before, you'll want to look at the, and so let's say you're a visual artist, you're going to want to look at our visual artists creations program, see if you're eligible there. If you are, then you can apply to this program, obviously for different kinds of activities, but that's how you're going to determine. And if you need help with that, we can help you with that. The program for individuals, we wanted as best as possible for it to be as simple and straightforward as possible. We don't want to burden you with too much. So it's a very brief application. The deadline is October 20th. You will be asked kind of who are you? What have you encountered over the last 6 months? What are the problems you're encountering? And how can this fund help you get to a place where you can practice your art again? It is a fixed grant amount of $4,000. So anybody who receives the grant will receive the $4,000. I'll get a little bit into what's eligible for all the programs a little bit after. So we'll go to the next category then, which is for the program for ad hoc groups, collectives, and organizations. So again, if you're eligible in one of our other programs at the OAC, then you're eligible here for this program. This has a November 3rd deadline, and this one has a grant for up to $15,000. It is a little bit of a longer application. You will be asked a series of questions. You will be asked for a budget, but other than that, it's to help your group or your organization again overcome whatever obstacles you are encountering to operate properly, to operate the way you need to right now. And then the final category is the program for organizational partnerships. This is only open to not-for-profit organizations or arts organizations, or for Ontario-based Canadian-owned book or periodical publishers. It is up to $30,000. You must identify at least one partner, but the partner is quite open. It can be any other group. It could be another arts group. It could be an arts collective. It could be another arts organization, or it could be an organization from a different sector, somebody from a group from the health sector perhaps, or the education sector, or the private sector, depending on what's appropriate for whatever it is that you're proposing. This category, this partnerships category, is a little bit different in that it's looking more outward. It's not so much about helping your organization. It's about looking at the sector, identifying some problems and needs that you see that's affecting multiple people or groups or perhaps everybody in the sector. And your proposal is to look at those issues and maybe thinking about new models that might help not just your organization, but either multiple organizations, or like I say, indeed, maybe, the sector at large, whether that sector is a particular discipline or, across the disciplines. So I can get into that one a little bit later too. So all three of the categories have these shared priorities that you see on the screen now. So any applicant from one of the 6 OAC's priority groups would be considered a priority for this program, as they always are at the OAC. The jury will also be considering applicants that are identifying and addressing really significant barriers. So we know that everybody's been impacted by this pandemic, but we also know that there has been an uneven impact, and that some communities and some individuals have experienced it in more extreme ways than others. So that's something that will be taken into consideration by the jury. And projects, we have also said that any projects that have the potential to benefit applicants long-term. So it doesn't have to. If it's just something you need right now and it's really necessary, but hopefully in 6 months that you won't need that anymore and you'll be going back to normal or that kind of thing, that's fine. But the priority would be for a project that maybe includes some training for you, or something else that or a slight shift in how you're working that actually will carry with you for the long term. You will benefit from that, we hope, much longer than maybe 2-3 months from now, that kind of thing. And then in addition, for applications from groups and organizations, we are also the jury will also be looking at what kind of role your group or organization plays in the community. And again, that community can be your discipline, your region, your cultural practice, whatever you would identify as your community in this case, and the role that you play and how this proposed project will help you continue to play that role, how it will help you be able to achieve your mandate and the goals of your group, because perhaps right now that's a challenge. It will also look at projects that, yes, may benefit you, and that's completely appropriate, but also will have benefits to maybe the artists you work with or serve, or other groups in your community that could benefit from maybe the learning that you're doing, or just the work that you do. So that will be taken into consideration. And so in terms of specifically what does it fund? So the bullets here identify sort of some specific things that we were thinking about. If you need to do some research and plan, and in some ways everything could be sort of, I think, fall under that research and planning bullet, but some specific examples we thought might be helpful. If you need to document your work because now you're putting it up online and you hadn't done that before. If you need to upgrade your technology, you need to, improve or develop a website to get to, to be able to disseminate your work in a different way. If you need to develop knowledge or skills, so whether that be administration, so you're doing work now that you didn't need to do in the past because of the situation, and maybe you need some help to learn how to do that well, or maybe even it's you're documenting your own work now instead of going out and having other people do it, and you need some skills to do that. Maybe you haven't done that kind of work to the extent that would be needed for a professionally looking work on your website, that kind of thing. Or maybe you've had to shift your artistic practice a little bit. Maybe you were a dancer that used to work with quite big groups, and now for whatever reason, whether it's because of your own health concerns or other issues, you can't work in that big kind of a group anymore, and you have to work, maybe you're going to try and work as a solo artist, but you need maybe someone to mentor you on because it's slightly different. That could be any number of things, but maybe if that applies to you, that would be eligible. If you need to take on the role of marketing your work to presenters directly that you didn't maybe have to do, or directly to the audiences where you used to have somebody do that for you, and that whole makeup has changed, if you need to do that. And if you need to adapt your workspace, whether that's at home or somewhere else, to be safe now, then those kind of expenses would be eligible. There is a limit to, unlike most OAC programs, those of you who are familiar with our programs, you'll know that any capital expenses are usually not eligible. We are allowing for some equipment and materials, like for maybe renovating your workspace a little bit, to be eligible here, but there is a limit of how much of the grant you can use for that. So for the individuals category, you can use up to $2,000 of the $4,000 grant towards those kind of expenses. And for the other two categories, it's up to $5,000. So if that's computers, lights, cameras, that kind of thing, even sort of software upgrades, you would have up to those limits. Okay, and maybe we'll just, okay, I'll go through this and then maybe I'll talk about a few examples and if anybody has some questions. So again, the individual application is a little bit different. It's October 20th deadline. It has 2 questions. It's going to ask you for your CV or resume, and that's really just to ensure that you're a professional artist. And the project will be assessed on merit. So again, if you're familiar with OAC, if you've applied with us before, it's a little bit different. Normally we ask you for artistic material and we'll assess it on artistic merit. This isn't as much about that. We need to know that you're a practicing artist yet, but the project is about your logistics. It's about, I used to go to a shared studio to work. I have some health concerns that make me particularly vulnerable during COVID-19. I don't want to go to my shared space, or maybe it's not open and I can't go. So I have to work from home, and but I don't have a studio set up at home. So whether that's as a musician, I need to do my own recording at home and I need to set something up, or I'm a visual artist and I need to set up a space where I can do my pottery or something. So it's really just about the merit of this project. What was the need that you identified? Does this proposed project seem to address those needs? Will it help you get to the point where you can now do your art again? For organizations categories, the two other categories, there is quite a fuller set of application questions. As I mentioned, you'd be asked for your budget. Again, just the CV or bios of the key participants. And if you, certainly for the partnership category, you would have to have a letter of intent from that partner. And again, if you are doing that one, it can be one partner or it could be multiple. And these two categories will be assessed on merit, impact, and viability. And maybe just a couple of other things as examples. We have quite a few conversations right now about people starting to go back into the workplace. Lizzie, maybe we'll just go back one slide. They have to learn how to do it safely. So if, for example, you were a media arts collective and you now are working together again, but you do have to take some safety precautions. So maybe you need to buy some literally masks and things and other sanitation stations. Maybe you need some additional boom mics to just make sure that you can keep yourself separated. Those kind of expenses are eligible. Maybe in addition, you're going to create a little guide for your collective members on how, maybe you'll bring someone in to talk to you about the safety protocols, any kind of rules or regulations you need to be sharing, or tips, best practices for you. You'll maybe create a little kit to help yourselves sort of know how to do that, and maybe you could make that available to others. That kind of thing would be eligible. Your time to do any kind of research, if you're researching new equipment or new software that you need to do to put things up online, and when look into all that, your time to do that research would be eligible. Bringing someone in to set that up, that expense, the training, how to use this new system that you now have, all that kind of stuff are eligible expenses. So I think I'll leave that program for now. Again, we're happy to take questions, but at this point, I'll move it over to Bushra to talk about the other program we're going to discuss with you. So Bushra, over to you. And Elizabeth, if you want to change the slide.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Right, so for the organizational one, so if we're used to doing festivals in person and we need to make everything adapt to virtual,
yep.
includes having booking studios and stuff that is more isolated, that we can do pre-recordings, that we can eventually do everything online. Is that eligible?
I think so. The festival itself wouldn't be eligible because, again, you would just go to our normal, media arts programs for the actual festival, even if the festival is online, even if you're doing it differently. But the things you need to do, yeah, if you need to do to get ready to do that online festival, I think what you said you were needing to do some setup work. Sorry, I couldn't hear you super well.
Yeah, some setup work, as in we have to book the spaces to get things ready to be pre-recorded beforehand.
Yeah, I think sort of the prep and the pre-work, the space, if you needed, I don't know if you would need space to do an online festival, but if once the actual activity, no. But that prep, especially if it's different kind of work and it's new or different kinds of expenses that you're incurring as a result of having to do it online, then yes.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a question, when is the deadline for individuals and organizations? So the deadline for individuals is first, it's October 20th at 1 p.m. All of our deadlines are at 1 p.m. And for the other two, the deadline is November 3rd.
Perhaps we can move on to Bushra.
Yeah, and we'll come back to these questions. Yeah.
So next slide, please, Lizzie. And thank you very much for hosting this session today, Charles and Sapamo. And so I'm Bushra Junaid. I'm the Outreach and Development Manager at the Ontario Arts Council. And I manage two granting programs. One is the Deaf and Disability Arts Projects Program, which supports creation, production, professional development for deaf and disability identified artists. And there are two deadlines coming up fairly soon. There's an October 9th deadline for the Deaf and Disability Arts Project's Materials for Visual Artists grant, and that's a small fund. It's just $500 essentially to buy materials and supplies required to create work. And then there's a larger Deaf and Disability Arts Projects deadline on October the 15th, which supports creation, production, and professional development. We are having a session next week hosted by Tangle Art and Disability. So if that will talk also about the Arts Response Initiative, but specifically about the Deaf and Disability Arts programs. Today, I'd like to focus on the other program I manage, which is called Skills and Career Development, Indigenous Arts Professionals and Arts Professionals of Color. Skills and Career Development supports Ontario-based Indigenous arts professionals and arts professionals of color, or ad hoc groups and collectives made up of Indigenous arts professionals or arts professionals of color for professional development and skill building opportunities that advance applicants' work and careers by broadening their knowledge, helping to refine their artistic approach, or allowing them to acquire greater mastery of their artistic practice. It funds all contemporary and traditional art practices that are supported at OAC, and it strives to address the lack of training institutions or formal training opportunities for those engaged in non-Western art practices. Projects can include study and training, mentorship, internship and apprenticeship, and documentation of artwork. So in terms of mentorship, we're talking about work that, working with a more experienced artist or elder or individual that's that you're going to be able to share knowledge, information with, skills, knowledge, standards, or best practices that will advance your career and enhance your education and build your network. So it might be mentoring with a choreographer, for example, work with a media artist to study editing, production, or story treatment, learning the fundamentals of music production and stage show creation by shadowing artists or by working in a recording studio, or receiving instruction in Indigenous cultural traditions, for example. In terms of internship and apprenticeship, we're speaking about sharpening your skills through arts-based work experience. So for example, an apprenticeship with an organization to learn hands-on skills about running the organization, things like marketing, promotion, fundraising, financial planning, that kind of thing, or to undertake an internship with a theater company to develop skills in playwriting, administration, artistic direction, or self-producing, or to mentor with an arts administrator to expand your knowledge of curatorial practices. When we speak of documentation of artwork, we're talking about the preparation of materials that document an artist's skills, training, and abilities. So for example, it might be around professional preparation of a demo recording for a musician. It might be archival recording of works in performance for dance artists. It might be demo reels for theater artists, for visual artist documentation of your artwork. It might be, if you're an arts educator, documentation of learner support material. It might be preparation of a website as a dissemination or presentation tool. You can ask for up to $10,000 towards your project. In fact, I would say the majority of applicants to this program are asking for activity that's $10,000 or less. And this allows you to pay artist fees, for example, to pay a mentor, or even to pay oneself for taking time away from paid employment, for example. It covers travel expenses, accommodation, meals, and that kind of thing. And hopefully we'll get to a time when we'll be able to do that more readily. Again, tuition, registration, or study fees, and also covers workspace or equipment rental and purchase of educational materials. So it's not meant to cover enrollment in an ongoing course of study, but certainly continuing education, taking courses on a continuation continuing education basis would be eligible. It doesn't cover things like operating costs, so salaries or office rent or those kinds of things, or taking an accredited college or university course. It also is not a creation production program because, as Maura mentioned, we have programs that support this activity. This is about what do I need to be able to do the creation production work. It also doesn't really support marketing or promotion or that kind of thing. The program it funds emerging, mid-career, and established arts professionals in all disciplines and practices. As I mentioned, it's open to arts professionals of color, Indigenous arts professionals, and that includes artists, arts administrators, community animators, curators, programmers, technicians, arts educators who are engaged in creating, promoting, presenting, distributing, and programming artistic work. And given the scope and complexity of this program, it's incredibly diverse. We have a peer assessment panel that represents the practice at the table. So I think that's what I'll leave it at for now. Just to say, though, that we just had a recent deadline in May, and we received a huge intake of applications, 138 in fact, and of them we were able to give out 49 grants, so about a 35–36% success rate overall. But since the beginning of this program was introduced in 2005, to date there have been 1,844 applications requesting $19 million, and we've been able to give out 806 applications for about $6 million overall. And back to you, Maura.
Well, I'll just say, Bushra, so there's a question about the deadline because it says 2020 on the slide. So indeed you did have that. And I guess we're just finalizing our deadlines for next year now. And
yes, so we haven't set the deadline for next year, but it will also likely be May of 2021.
Great.
A couple of questions. I'm not sure if you can just read them through. Or
sure. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to just get back out there. Okay, so there was a, if your organization serves the whole country and not just Ontario, yeah, you're eligible at the OAC as long as you're located in Ontario and you do serve the Ontario community. I would say that's not an issue, and especially for I mean, if you were going to be working on adapting some physical spaces in different provinces, we probably wouldn't fund that part. But if your work is being done here, even if it may impact the whole country, that's fine, or serve the whole country.
There's a question here, Maura, that says if should you disclose if you are immune compromised?
No, and thank you for that question. I did mean to address that. We are asking applicants to tell the jury what their barrier is. So, if that is part of your, if you have health issues that are part of your barrier, ideally it would be a help to the jury just to understand what your project is, to share as much as you're comfortable with. Obviously, we're not asking people to divulge anything that is not going to, that they don't feel comfortable sharing beyond, in a grant application. I certainly understand that, but as much as you can share to allow the jury to understand what it is that you need to overcome, hopefully there's a way that you can share a little bit, and it could be very brief. I have. Bushra, what do you think? I
would say I would add to that in terms of that you don't necessarily need to disclose what your disability is, no. But you can talk about these, as Maura was saying, this is what I'm trying to overcome. So I need support to make my space more environmentally sensitive. That there you're not disclosing a diagnosis, but you're talking about what the need is.
Yes, thank you, Bushra.
There's one on organizational category. Can artist collectors apply for creative projects that have had to be adjusted because of the pandemic?
Or is it geared more towards organizations and institutions? No, absolutely, it's open to small groups and collectives. Absolutely. I just want to make sure. So for the creative project, obviously, again, hopefully it's clear that this fund won't fund the actual creative project itself. But if you, as a group, need to set something up, or you have to work a little bit differently and need some help with that, then absolutely, it's open to collectives for that kind of work as well.
One here about we want to create a ceramic studio for artists who do not have home studios. Would this be eligible?
Yeah. So yes, that is eligible. I mean, bearing in mind if you're actually working on spaces and you have to actually create. Maybe you found a location, but you need to do some work to make it safe and set up so that people are far apart and all that kind of thing. There's proper ventilation. Yes, you can apply for that. Only $5,000 of it could go to that actual work, but your time and to look and having people advise you, those kind of expenses would also be eligible up to the $15,000 maximum.
Can organizations receiving operating funding also apply?
Okay, good question. Yes, you can. This program is open to everybody. If you receive operating, if you've received other grants from us, it does not count those of you who do have grants from us. As you probably are aware, we have a 3-grant maximum in a year. This grant does not count towards that maximum either.
A couple of questions around, can you apply for more than one of these funds simultaneously?
So I guess quickly the answer is no, with some conditions. So you can't put in yourself multiple projects that you want to carry out. You would have to choose one. If your project, if you are, let's say you're a collective and so you are eligible for up to the $15,000, in this project is only going to cost you maybe $6,000, you could apply, unlike most of the grants, it could have multiple kind of projects within your application, but only up to the $15,000 maximum. That being said, if you are an individual, if you have an individual arts practice and you work in a group or organization or collective, you can apply for your own individual work. It would have to be clearly for different activity and for a different need that you're trying to address. But if I could apply for my own work and then the work that Bushra and I do together, we also need help that's different, then you could apply to the collectives one as well.
I think this one's for Bushra. Does the School of Continuing Studies, is it eligible for skills and career development funds?
Yes, you could apply for to take courses on a continuing education basis, whether that be from any, U of T, OCAD, Humber, you name it. You can, we regularly support people to take courses on a continuing education basis. But we wouldn't support you to enroll full-time in those institutions.
So would creating new digital educational programming for high schools be covered?
In this fund, so digital, it has to be part of your artistic practice. So if you're an arts educator and you normally go in and work in the schools, and obviously right now you can't, then yes, whatever it is you need to do to continue that work of engaging with teachers and students, I would say yes.
And final reporting requirements for the individual artists?
Sorry, say that again.
What are the final reporting requirements for the individual artists? Yeah.
You will be asked how you spent the $4,000. I mean, you'll be asked what you did with it, with the money. What did you do? And hopefully, I mean, also partly, final reports, we use them to also hear, like, what was the impact? Did it work? Did it help you out? Or did it not? And that's okay too. Did you, hopefully you learned something, even if it didn't work out the way you thought it did. So it is nice to hear those stories of what happened and what you were able to do, what you were able to accomplish. And you will be asked to sort of outline how that $4,000 was spent.
There was one here, I think this is to everybody, as to whether or not there's an initiative in Toronto that's similar to the Ottawa one for the ceramic studio. So I will just send that out into the universe and maybe someone might be able to respond to that.
Exactly.
I'm not seeing any. Are there any other questions or that people
There was
might have?
a nuance I didn't pick up on, Charles, about for organizations. Can you apply to the organize and the partnerships? Yes, you can. So you could be applying for your own organization to your internal workings, and then be the lead in or a partner in the partnership one you make, because it would have to be, again, for very distinct work.
So there's a question, what's the criteria for recognizing a collective?
So a collective at the OAC is made up of 2 or more artists that are eligible in our individual category, so professional artists who are based in Ontario. So, well, at least, what is it, Bushra? At least half, or at least 50% have to be Ontario based. So at least, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. And in terms of, there was a question about professional artists in general. I mean, yeah, there's so many different ways to be a professional artist or to be identified as professional artist. Yes, of course, it could be formal schooling, but it could be that you're self-taught. It could be that you are taught by a family member or someone in your community, or you, all those things are certainly recognized. And yeah, we do have this sort of way of thinking about it. It's if people in your community recognize you within that arts, that discipline community recognize you as an artist. If you seek payment for your art, I mean, we know that's easier said than done, but if that is your goal, is to have payment for your art and you share it with the public, these are the kinds of things that we think about for professional artists.
What's the service standard for determinations on the applications? I guess what's the criteria?
What is it?
I think it would be, is it a peer assessed? Is that what they're asking?
Okay, maybe.
What is it?
I would assume so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. Oh yeah, we didn't get to that. So actually, Lizzie, could you move forward in the slide, because there is a slide about assessment. Just, I mean, it's not a very exciting slide, but yes. So it will be assessed by, like all of our regular programs, by a jury of peers. So other artists and arts workers in the field. In this program, in the Arts Response Initiative, well, I guess in both actually, for both our programs, it's a multidisciplinary jury. So keep that in mind. If it's something that you're speaking about that's very specific to your discipline practice, remember you might be speaking to people who are working in different disciplines. It is that's the other thing I wanted to mention. It's a 4-month turnaround. So you're applying October 20th, November 3rd. That means you're going to be notified by February 20th and by March 3rd of the results. Your activity can start after the deadline. So whether that's October 20th or November 3rd, it can start as of that moment, but cannot be finished until that notification date. And also just bear in mind, you won't know whether you have the funds till then. So depending on what your activity is and depending on how reliant you are on these funds to do that activity, that's the time frame you're looking at.
Question, would new organizations that would have practiced in person but don't have existing proof of that practice be eligible to develop new projects?
You'd have to show, I mean, that you will have to include a history of your group or organization and what you do. I mean, we'd have to know, it is about adapting. So the jury would have to have some sense of what you have done prior in order to understand how that has changed. So in terms of proof, I mean, you would just have to show, and by show, I mean tell, I guess, through the written form, whether that's your bios and history, and the answers to the questions, what you have done and why it needs to be adapted.
Do any of these programs support IT and software investments to support the sector?
I think it can. I mean, it's sort of, so when you're saying to support the sector, so looking more broadly than any one organization, I'm sort of imagining some of the partnership programs may look at that, may look at this, what has clearly been identified as some issues that many in the sector have had over the last few months, may address some of that, if that's what you're thinking. But I am, that outward looking and more sectoral sort of thinking is what we're imagining would come through in some of the partnership applications.
So can you apply for individual creation grant as well as the skills and career development grants for different areas of your practice?
Yes. So you could have an application into media art creation projects, for example, to direct a documentary. And then you could also have an application into skills and career development to shadow, a well-known documentary filmmaker.
What kind of information needs to be in the resume or CV? I'm assuming that's for the individual artists.
Yeah, so this is your arts practice resume. So this is where the jury will look to see, to get a sense of how long you've been practicing, what kind of work you do to assess your professional level, that kind of thing. So it's your arts resume that would be looking for. And
could a collective be one person as an artist and another person as an arts administrator?
I think so, because we say arts, a worker. So as long as they are you go to our eligibility questions on our website of eligible applicants. It's 2 or more, and I believe we say artists, professional artists, and arts workers. So I think that might be possible if you work as a collective.
Will there be one jury assessing all three streams, or will there be three separate juries, or?
Right. So there'll definitely be two, because the individual one is quite different in terms of how it's set up, but also we think how it might need to be assessed. So definitely the individuals will have its own jury. The other two, it may be merged. It'll depend a little bit on numbers, to be honest, and what kinds of projects come in, who we need around the table.
Okay, we're coming to about 5 minutes to the end of this hour, so we just take a couple more questions. Are operational infrastructure investments eligible for any of these programs?
Certainly, if in the new program, in the Arts Response Initiative, if that change is because of COVID, if you've had to really change how you operate, and like you say, the infrastructure, then it could be, but that's the important link, is that it's been caused because of the pandemic.
Okay. No, Andrew, I'm sorry, we're running out of time here. So about grant writing tips, I would suggest you connect with the grant officers directly.
And that is the first thing on the tips, actually. Lizzie, if you just want to pop it up real fast, it's just, to connect with us, read the information, give yourself lots of time.
Okay. Maybe a final question. Okay. Again, I really want to thank Bushra, Elizabeth, Moira for this moment to explain the new initiative and promote accessibility to it. And I really want to thank those who have joined us today to learn this information. Hopefully you'll be applying to one of these various opportunities, and hopefully everyone is successful. That would be wonderful.
We would love that too.
Yeah. I really want to thank the OAC for pushing for this initiative and for your openness in promoting it to as broadly as you possibly can. It's a difficult time, and artists are all worried about how do we continue our work. This gives some hope that there is opportunities to do that. Again, we will be, this session has been recorded, so once we've edited, we will broadcast this and to others who want to listen to it and see it. And I would encourage anyone to follow up with the grants officers if they have any more particular questions related to their specific asks or potential asks. Thanks, everyone, and have a good Friday and a good weekend. Enjoy what's left of summer weather.
Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Sabamo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.